Dr. Zara Blackwood stared at the crime scene photo pinned to her office wall, her coffee growing cold as the same haunting question echoed through her mind for the 1000th time. What if everything she thought she knew about evil was completely wrong? After 15 years as the FBI's top behavioral profiler, tracking down serial killers and predators across the country, she had discovered something so disturbing about the human mind that it kept her awake at night, questioning everyone around her. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Zara shuffled through case files that had consumed her life. Ted Bundy, Jeffrey Dahmer, John Wayne Gacy. Their faces stared back at her from manila folders, each representing countless victims and shattered families. But tonight was different. Tonight, she wasn't reviewing old cases. She was preparing to break protocol and reveal what the FBI had ordered her to keep classified for over a decade. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened the first file, remembering the moment everything changed. It was 3 years ago when she interviewed Marcus Webb, a soft-spoken accountant who had murdered his entire family on Christmas morning. As she sat across from him in that sterile interrogation room, something clicked. His mannerisms, his speech patterns, the way he tilted his head when lying, it was identical to every other killer she had profiled. Not similar, identical. Zara's phone buzzed with a text from her supervisor. "Remember your oath, Blackwood. Some truths aren't meant for public consumption." She deleted the message and continued typing her resignation letter. The public deserved to know what she had uncovered, even if it cost her everything. Even if it meant admitting that psychopaths weren't born the way most people believed. The discovery had started innocently enough during a routine case review. Zara noticed patterns that went beyond typical behavioral analysis. Every single psychopath she had studied, without exception, displayed the exact same micro-expression when discussing their crimes. It lasted less than half a second, a specific combination of facial muscle contractions that occurred when they recalled the moment they first felt true power over another human being. But that was just the beginning. As she dug deeper into neurological scans, childhood records, and interview transcripts spanning decades, a terrifying picture emerged. These killers didn't just share similar backgrounds or brain structures. They shared something far more specific and disturbing, something that challenged everything psychology textbooks taught about the nature of evil. Her laptop screen glowed in the darkened office as she pulled up the classified research that had nearly destroyed her marriage to Detective Mike Blackwood and cost her countless sleepless nights. The data was undeniable, meticulously documented across hundreds of cases. Every psychopath, from the most notorious serial killers to white-collar criminals who destroyed lives without bloodshed, had experienced the exact same triggering event between the ages of 7 and 9. Zara remembered the night she first realized the implications. She had been reviewing childhood interviews with convicted killers when she noticed they all described the same moment, not abuse, not trauma in the traditional sense, but something far more subtle and universal. It was a moment when they first understood that other people's pain could be ... useful. The revelation had sent her spiraling into months of verification, cross-referencing international cases, consulting with colleagues in other countries. The pattern held true across cultures, socioeconomic backgrounds, and time periods. It was as if humanity had a hidden switch that, when flipped at precisely the right developmental stage, created monsters. What made her stomach turn wasn't just the consistency of the pattern, but what it implied about free will, about the randomness of evil, about how many people walking among us might be one specific childhood moment away from becoming predators. Zara had identified over 2,000 individuals who showed early signs of this same triggering event, and the FBI had been quietly monitoring them for years. As she prepared to go public with her findings, Zara couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Her research had attracted attention from people who preferred certain truths remained buried. But the families of victims deserved answers, even if those answers were more terrifying than the questions. Tomorrow, she would reveal the one thing that connected every psychopath she had ever studied. The moment that transformed innocent children into humanity as greatest predators. Zara's hands shook as she entered the abandoned warehouse where she had agreed to meet investigative journalist Rebecca Martinez. The location felt appropriately dramatic for what she was about to reveal, though the irony wasn't lost on her that she was meeting in the same type of isolated building where several of her profiled killers had claimed their victims. The weight of classified files in her briefcase felt heavier with each step. Rebecca was already waiting, her recording equipment set up on a makeshift table constructed from old wooden crates. The journalist's reputation for exposing government cover-ups had made her Zara's only option for getting this information to the public. Every mainstream media outlet had refused to touch the story after receiving what Zara suspected were threats from her former employers at the FBI. "You look terrified," Rebecca observed, studying Zara's pale complexion and the dark circles under her eyes. "Are you sure you want to do this? Once this information is public, there's no going back. People are going to demand answers you might not be ready to give." Zara nodded, settling into the uncomfortable plastic chair across from Rebecca. She had spent the last week considering the consequences of what she was about to reveal. Her pension was gone, her security clearance revoked, and her marriage to Detective Mike Blackwood was hanging by a thread. But the truth was bigger than her personal comfort, bigger than the FBI's desire to maintain public order. 3 years ago, I was assigned to profile a case that seemed routine. Zara began, her voice steadying as she fell into the familiar rhythm of case presentation. A family annihilator named Marcus Webb had killed his wife and 2 children on Christmas morning. No prior history of violence, no obvious triggers. Just an ordinary man who suddenly became a monster overnight. Rebecca leaned forward, her pen moving quickly across her notepad. "What made this case different from the hundreds of others you'd worked?" During the interview, Marcus described the moment he decided to kill his family. He talked about standing in his kitchen on Christmas Eve, watching his wife wrap presents, and suddenly realizing that he had complete power over whether she lived or died. But it wasn't the content of what he said that caught my attention. It was how he said it. Zara opened her briefcase and withdrew a tablet containing hundreds of video files, I noticed Marcus made the exact same facial expression, lasting approximately 0.3 seconds, when he described that moment of realization. It was so brief that most people would miss it entirely. But I'd seen that expression before in every single psychopath I'd interviewed over 15 years. The warehouse felt colder as Zara scrolled through video after video, showing Rebecca the nearly imperceptible micro-expression that appeared across faces of killers separated by decades and geography. It was always the same, a slight tightening around the eyes, a barely visible upturn of the left corner of the mouth, and a subtle dilation of the pupils that occurred when they recalled their first moment of understanding their own capacity for control through causing pain. I started going back through old cases, looking for this expression in archived interviews. Jeffrey Dahmer made this exact face when describing his first kill. Ted Bundy displayed it when talking about his earliest assault. Every single one of them, without exception, showed this same involuntary response when recalling what I came to call their awakening moment. Rebecca set down her pen, processing the implications. You're talking about hundreds of cases spanning decades. That level of consistency isn't coincidence. Exactly, but the micro-expression was just the surface. As I dug deeper, I discovered that every single psychopath had experienced the same specific childhood trigger between ages 7 and 9. Not abuse, not neglect, not trauma as we typically understand it. Something far more subtle and universal. Zara's voice dropped to barely above a whisper as she revealed the core of her discovery. They all described the exact same moment, watching an authority figure, usually a parent or teacher, deliberately ignore someone else's genuine distress while maintaining a facade of caring. Not witnessing abuse directly, but seeing the calculated performance of empathy while real suffering was ignored. The journalist's expression shifted from professional interest to genuine alarm. You're suggesting that psychopathy isn't random or genetic, but triggered by a specific, identifiable experience that could theoretically happen to any child? That's exactly what I'm saying. These children witness what I call performed empathy, adults going through the motions of caring while consciously choosing not to help someone in need. The child realizes in that moment that empathy is optional, that caring can be faked, and that power comes from choosing when to care and when not to. Zara pulled up brain scans on her tablet, showing the neurological changes that occurred in subjects who had experienced this triggering moment. The scary part isn't just that this creates psychopaths, it's how common this experience actually is. We estimate that roughly 15% of children witness this specific scenario during the critical developmental window. If that's true, Rebecca said slowly, then why aren't 15% of people psychopaths? Zara's smile was grim as she prepared to reveal the most disturbing aspect of her research. That's what we're still trying to figure out. Most children who experience this trigger don't become killers. They become something else entirely, something that might be even more dangerous to society. The weight of Zara's revelation hung in the dusty warehouse air as Rebecca processed the implications of what she had just heard. Zara could see the journalist's mind racing, connecting dots that painted an increasingly disturbing picture of human nature. The truth was even more complex than what she had revealed so far, and Zara knew the hardest part was yet to come. You mentioned that most children who experience this trigger don't become killers, Rebecca said carefully. What do they become? Zara stood and began pacing, a habit she had developed during her most difficult cases. That's where my research took a turn that the FBI couldn't tolerate. I started tracking down adults who had experienced the same childhood trigger but never committed violent crimes. What I found was arguably more unsettling than the serial killers I'd been profiling. She pulled out another file, this one significantly thicker than the criminal cases. Meet Jennifer Walsh, CEO of a pharmaceutical company who knowingly released a drug with fatal side effects to meet quarterly projections. David Kumar, a family court judge who deliberately separated children from loving parents because he enjoyed the power. Lisa Morrison, a therapist who systematically destroyed her patients' self-esteem to create dependency. Rebecca's pen had stopped moving. They're all successful, functioning members of society. Exactly. The childhood trigger creates two distinct paths. A small percentage become what we traditionally recognize as psychopaths, violent criminals who operate outside societal norms. But the majority become something far more dangerous, highly functional individuals who use legitimate authority and social structures to cause systematic harm while maintaining perfect public facades. Zara returned to her seat, her voice taking on the clinical tone she had used in FBI briefings. These individuals learned early that empathy is performance, that caring is optional, and that real power comes from manipulating systems rather than breaking them. They become doctors who enjoy watching patients suffer, teachers who deliberately crush children's spirits, politicians who craft policies knowing they'll cause widespread misery. The journalist's face had gone pale. You're describing a hidden population of sadists in positions of power. Not sadists, Zara corrected. That implies they derive pleasure from causing pain. These individuals are something more calculating. They don't necessarily enjoy suffering. They simply don't factor it into their decision-making process. Other people's pain is irrelevant data, easily ignored when it conflicts with their goals. Zara opened her laptop and pulled up a database that had taken her 3 years to compile. I've identified over 12,000 individuals in positions of authority who exhibit the behavioral markers consistent with this childhood trigger. Federal judges, hospital administrators, corporate executives, school principals, social workers, people who make decisions that affect thousands of lives daily. How is this possible? How could the FBI have this information and not act on it? Zara's laugh was bitter, because acting on it would mean acknowledging that our entire social structure is built on a foundation of individuals who are fundamentally incapable of genuine empathy. Do you know what percentage of Fortune 500 CEOs show markers consistent with this psychological profile? 37%. Federal judges, 28%. Hospital administrators, 41%. Rebecca set down her recording equipment, overwhelmed by the scope of what Zara was revealing. This isn't just about identifying psychopaths anymore. You're talking about a shadow population that has systematically gained control of institutions, specifically because their lack of empathy gives them competitive advantages. Now you're beginning to understand why the FBI classified this research. Imagine the social upheaval if people knew that the individuals making life and death decisions in hospitals, courts, and corporations are statistically likely to be incapable of genuinely caring about the consequences of their actions. Zara pulled up a specific case file that had haunted her for months. Dr. Patricia Vance, head of pediatric surgery at Children's Hospital of Seattle. I interviewed her as part of my research into high-functioning individuals with the psychological markers. She described watching her mother ignore her younger brother's appendicitis symptoms for 3 days, despite his obvious pain, because it was inconvenient to visit the emergency room. Patricia was 8 years old. What happened to the brother? He died, but Patricia learned something valuable that day, that caring is a choice, and choosing not to care can be strategically advantageous. She became one of the country's most successful pediatric surgeons with an exceptional track record of complex operations. But nurses reported that she seemed unusually calm during procedures where children died, never showing the emotional toll that typically affects medical professionals. Rebecca was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications. You're suggesting that our most important institutions are disproportionately controlled by people who are psychologically incapable of caring about the human cost of their decisions. I'm not suggesting it, Zara replied grimly. I'm stating it as documented fact. The childhood trigger I identified doesn't just create monsters who operate outside society. It creates monsters who thrive within society by using its structures to cause harm on a massive scale. As Zara prepared to reveal the final, most disturbing aspect of her research, she wondered if Rebecca was prepared for the truth about how this psychological profile could be identified in real time, potentially preventing the creation of future predators, or whether that knowledge would prove too dangerous for public consumption. Zara watched Rebecca struggle to absorb the magnitude of what she had revealed, knowing that the final piece of information would be the most difficult to accept. The warehouse felt smaller now, as if the weight of hidden truths was compressing the space around them. Zara's phone had been buzzing continuously with calls from unknown numbers, a clear sign that powerful people were aware of this meeting and deeply unhappy about it. "There's something else," Zara said quietly. "Something that made the FBI classify my research at the highest levels and cost me my career. I didn't just identify the trigger that creates these individuals. I developed a way to predict who will experience it." Rebecca looked up sharply from her notes. "You can predict which children will become psychopaths?" "Not exactly. I can identify family systems and social environments where the triggering scenario is statistically likely to occur. More importantly, I can identify children who have already experienced it but haven't yet developed the full psychological profile." Zara opened another file, revealing months of covert observations and psychological assessments. The trigger creates a specific window of opportunity between the initial experience and the final psychological formation. During this period, which typically lasts 18 to 24 months, intervention is theoretically possible. What kind of intervention? That's the million-dollar question. Traditional therapy doesn't work because these children haven't technically done anything wrong yet. They've simply learned a different understanding of how empathy functions in human relationships. The challenge is teaching them that their initial observation, that empathy is performed rather than genuine, was a limited perspective based on witnessing damaged adults. Zara's voice became more intense as she revealed the most controversial aspect of her research. I secretly worked with 12 children who had recently experienced the trigger without their parents' knowledge or FBI approval. The intervention required convincing them that genuine empathy exists, despite their traumatic realization that it can be faked. Rebecca leaned forward, sensing they were approaching the heart of Zara's revelation. What happened to those children? 8 of them responded positively to intervention. They maintained their natural empathy development despite witnessing the triggering scenario. But 4 of them ... Zara paused, struggling with the ethical implications of what she had discovered. 4 of them became more sophisticated in their understanding of how to manipulate empathy in others. The intervention accidentally taught them to become better predators. The journalist's face went white. You created more dangerous psychopaths. Unintentionally, yes. This is why the FBI shut down my research and why I can never work in law enforcement again. My attempt to prevent the development of psychopathy in 4 children instead accelerated their psychological formation and gave them advanced manipulation techniques they wouldn't have developed naturally for years. Zara stood and walked to the warehouse window, looking out at the city lights where thousands of people lived their lives unaware of the predators moving among them. One of those children, now 11 years old, has already begun systematically destroying his classmates' social relationships for entertainment. Another has learned to create carefully crafted scenarios where adults blame themselves for the child's manipulative behavior. How do you live with that knowledge? By accepting that some problems don't have solutions, only management strategies. The childhood trigger that creates psychopaths is embedded in the fundamental structure of how power operates in families and institutions. You can't eliminate it without completely restructuring human society. Zara returned to the table and pulled out her final file, a thick folder marked with her own name. This is the part that will probably get me killed for going public. I didn't just research other people's psychological profiles. I researched my own. Rebecca's pen stopped moving entirely. What did you find? I experienced the triggering scenario when I was 8 years old. I watched my father, a respected police captain, ignore a domestic violence call from our neighbor because he was having an affair with the woman's husband's sister and didn't want complications. The woman was hospitalized 2 days later. The warehouse seemed to grow colder as Zara continued. I learned that day that adults in authority positions could choose when to care and when not to, based on personal convenience. That caring was optional, contextual, strategic. I've spent my entire career hunting predators, not because I genuinely empathize with victims, but because it provided a socially acceptable outlet for my fascination with human suffering. Rebecca was staring at Zara with a mixture of horror and fascination. "Are you saying that you're—" "I'm saying that I've spent 15 years studying psychopaths while being one myself. The difference is that I chose to use my lack of empathy to hunt monsters instead of becoming one. But the choice was conscious, deliberate, and could be revoked at any time." Zara's smile was cold and calculating as she delivered her final revelation. "The FBI didn't just classify my research because it threatened social stability. They classified it because they realized that many of their most effective agents, including me, were psychopaths who had chosen to work within the system rather than against it. The question isn't how to identify and eliminate psychopaths, it's how to ensure they choose to be useful rather than destructive." As Zara prepared to leave, knowing that her life would never be the same after this conversation, she wondered if Rebecca would have the courage to publish a story that revealed not just the existence of hidden predators, but the uncomfortable truth that society's protection from those predators often came from other predators, who had simply chosen different targets. If this story left you questioning everyone around you, you're not alone. The psychology of evil runs deeper than most people realize. Hit that subscribe button to dive into more disturbing truths about human nature that will change how you see the world forever. Share this story with someone who thinks they can spot a psychopath. They might be shocked by what they learn. And comment below. Have you ever witnessed someone fake empathy while ignoring real suffering? Your story could be the key to understanding this phenomenon even better. Remember, the most dangerous predators are often the ones you least suspect.